not to scare companies, but candidate tools are being developed faster than company tools.
Yep.
So, to the arms race comment, there
Yes.
are more candidate tools than there are company tools at this moment.
Don't conduct your analysis in isolation because data is so incredibly powerful.
Not defending just the tribe, but defending the organization.
Those creative people that you really want to keep empowered, keep excited, keep motivated, keep thinking.
A good experience pays dividends down the line.
Stereotypes tend to break down in proximity.
Welcome to We're Only Human, a podcast about human resources, business, technology, and the workplace. My name is Ben Eubanks, your host, and I'm so glad you're here.
Hey everyone, welcome back to We're Only Human. I am Ben Eubanks, your host. And if you remember recently, if you've been listening to the show for a while, I had a great guest on talking about recruiting in the age of AI, some of the things that can and can't be done by the technologies, some of the ways that it can add value to the process. And that guest was Terhark. And today he is back with me. We're going to talk about one of the other hot button issues for TA leaders and recruiting teams everywhere, which is candidate fraud. So Terry, welcome back. Glad you're here.
Ben, Happy New Year. Great to see you. I'm excited to talk about this topic. It is one that is top of mind for all HR professionals as well as talent acquisition leaders. So anxious to dig into it a little bit.
Yes, absolutely, for sure. For all of you listening in, if you want to go back and check this after you hear Terry, episode 214 is the one we just released recently, where you can go back and hear some of his other thoughts on the AI piece. Terry, before we get into this, though, some people may not know you. This may be the first time to hear from you. So would you take a minute and tell us more about who you are and what you do, please?
Absolutely, Ben. Again, Terry Terhark. I've been in recruiting for better than 30 years. I've spent my career in recruitment outsourcing with a variety of firms. I've also worked for big corporations as a result of my businesses being acquired. I've certainly watched the industry change, recruiting, how technology is enabling us as professionals to do more, to be more efficient. And I've had the great pleasure of working with some of the world's finest corporations over the course of my career, and excited to see what's next for all of us as well.
It is an interesting time, an exciting time.
Very
And
much so.
maybe in the next 30 minutes, we're going to tell people it's a little bit of a scary time to be in the world of recruiting. So we're going to get into all that and cover those bases there. You are one of the people that I respect and appreciate in the space. And when you speak up, I've got to slow down and listen because I've learned a lot from you as you're sharing. So I want to give you that kudos before we started out here. So
My friend.
for all of you out there listening in the audience, one of the things that, as we're prepping for this, Terry and I were going back and forth, and I found one of the stats that stuck out to me, that there are some organizations that say in the next few years, as many as 1 in 4 candidates could be fraudulent out there, which just creates this weird picture for me of low trust, and it's a challenging atmosphere. So before we get into some of the stuff around how to address this, what to do about it, let's define it a little bit. So Terry, how would you define candidate fraud as someone who, as you said, has these decades of experience in and around the recruiting industry? How would you define that?
Yeah, good question, Ben. I think fundamentally for me, it's misrepresentation in one way or another throughout that entire selection process. And it could be as simple as misrepresenting themselves on their resume or their LinkedIn profile, which we've had for many years. I'm not surprised by the 25% being fake. I read the same thing that Gartner had published that statistic very recently. But I think technology has enabled candidates to be more creative in the way that there is misrepresentation. And whether that's misrepresenting where they live, the location that they're in, misrepresenting by having somebody stand in to do their interview, misrepresenting their visa status or eligibility to work. Those are all new areas that we haven't seen as recruiters in the past that are now becoming more and more prevalent. But I would boil it down to it's a misrepresentation by the candidate at some point in that selection process.
Yeah, that's, as you said, there's just a whole range of them. And some of that is, there's always been a little bit of that. Okay, there's the real me, and then there's the resume me. Looks really good, looks very shiny, all the good things. Well, I said no hiring manager would hire someone that's, I don't work well in teams, I'm not really good at collaborating. They don't put those things on the resume, and they're really out there. So this whole range of them, I'll tell you that in our data that we collected just a couple months back, I guess last year at this time, we collect some data on this from talent acquisition leaders. And they were telling us, listen, if someone's using AI to work on their resume and try to adapt to a job, that's fine. But if it's adding in skills they don't really have to match the job, or if they start using it, as you said, for taking a test, taking an assessment, or they have someone else do that for them, that's when you start to get into this area that's completely fraudulent. It's a lie, people. Okay. Terry was nice. He said misrepresenting. It's a lie when you get to that level of it. So this is a reality that these teams are facing, and your friends, my friends, are trying to recruit in this industry, in this atmosphere, and it's really tough. Talk about the AI piece of this. We talked before in that last episode about some of the positive things, the opportunities it gives us, but on the candidate side, is creating some challenges for this sort of fraud landscape when it comes to this.
Yeah, I think, Ben, it falls into a number of categories, and forgive me for being verbose on this, but number one, I think it is first and foremost perfecting the resume, right? So yes, there's always been mistruths and stretching the resume a little bit. AI, ChatGPT has permitted candidates to be able to perfect the resume. And to further that, I was talking to one of our recruiters who was doing a recent search, and she saw two identical resumes. Other than the name, everything was identical. So when you go into a ChatGPT and have them help you do your resume based upon a job description or whatnot, you're going to get very similar resumes. So I think the ability for someone to perfect that resume has increased wholeheartedly. I think there are other tools that are available for a candidate, such as aiding them during the interview process. And I've seen these AI platforms that, prior to the interview, they're going to consume the job description. They're going to consume information about the company. They're going to consume information about previous interview questions that they can garner from Glassdoor or from other sources. And they're there as a resource. And they are getting very good, by the way, meaning they can respond in real time, providing answers to candidates based upon the questions that the interviewers are asking. We are seeing additionally people standing in or assuming a false identity during the interview process, so somebody else is actually doing the interview for the person that actually has a resume. Same thing on assessments, whether that's doing work product or work exercises, having either a shared screen where somebody's doing that or possibly somebody standing in for someone else. And it goes so far as people having false references and, again, using their friends as references. And it's much harder to detect those things today with technology, again, helping to perfect the resume. But it does fall into a number of categories. So we had an instance where we had hired two technology professionals. It was for a US-based organization. It was a remote position, but the requirement was to be in the United States. And we did not find out until after the offer, until the person was ready to start, that both were in India. And it happened two separate times on two different positions. And we had a pretty elaborate process. I think the tools that are at a candidate's disposal are much more sophisticated and much easier to use than what they were even 12 months ago. And some are there generally to be an aid for a candidate to help them through the process, because it is hard. I put out a post on LinkedIn recently that we're hiring recruiters. It wasn't even a job posting. It was just like, hey, we're hiring. I had over 100,000 views of that post. I had over 3,000 LinkedIn connections and over 3,000 resumes for those roles. And it just emphasizes how difficult it is for candidates to find the right opportunity. We continue to hear the frustrations that candidates have trying to be seen, trying to stand out. And these tools are enticing to candidates to be able to help them stand out, if that makes sense, Ben.
Yeah, I've said for a while that I am firmly in the camp of I'm supporting my friends in the recruiting industry, the HR professionals, the business leaders. They're trying to solve problems and hire the right people. At the same time, if you're not doing something completely fraudulent, I have a hard time holding it against someone that's, listen, I got to feed my kids. I got to find a job. I got to be competitive. And if everybody else is doing it, I feel pressured to do the same thing, because that's now the floor is doing what I have to use one of the automated application tools to send my resume to jobs the second they open, or I get locked out because I'm not using an algorithm to compete for those jobs. So that story about the Indian hires was wild there. I'll give you a counterpoint to that one, or another story there. A friend of mine works for a company, large enterprise firm, almost 200,000 global employees there. And they did an interview process, went through the technical screening, everything else remotely, hired the person, and the person gets on the job. And for the next 6 months, can't do the most basic of tasks on the job. And they're like, what's going on? Maybe she's nervous. Maybe it's a different environment. And they did all these things, coaching, everything else. And finally, they realized that she had used one of those tools during the interview to answer all the questions because she said, it's brilliant. She could do my job.
Exactly.
But then once they're on the job, they can't do the most basic, simple things. Even with a lot of oversight and handholding, there's no way to get it up there. And they eventually move her on. But that story, I'm thinking about, we talked for years, Terry, about what's the cost of ghosting when someone, says they'll show up on day one, they don't show up. The cost of hiring someone who is lying about their ability, and then we'd spend 6 months trying to coach them up, or 3 months, or whatever the probation period is before we move them on, that cost is dramatically higher because we've put in all the time into that.
Yeah, fundamentally, exponentially higher than someone ghosting you, having the wrong person show up. And one of the things that is problematic today that just astonishes me is people with dual employment. They'll have a full-time job, and then they'll get another full-time job and not tell either employer that they have another full-time job. And if they're remote, it's much easier for them to remain unidentified that they have more than one job. And they're not putting it on their LinkedIn profile, and they're not promoting that, but they're essentially collecting two salaries. And I'm assuming not being able to give kind of full effort to either one of those organizations. But that is growing. And particularly in the IT space, it's growing.
So now that we've scared the pants off of everybody listening to us right now, what are some of the things we can do about it? What are some of the ways? Because you said, listen, we had a pretty robust process. We still found out, like at the tail end of that, something that we had missed. So let's talk about some of the things they could potentially do about this.
So there's a number of things that can be done throughout the process. And this was interesting to me. One is doing ID checks at every step of the process. So actually having the candidate, if you're doing a video interview, if you're interacting via video, to have them produce their ID right in front of you. I also read that if you are doing a work exercise or you're doing some type of an assessment, ask the candidate to share their screen. So if the candidate is using some type of aid to help them answer questions or to help them perform an assessment, asking them to share their screen will absolutely show that they're doing that. And if they are, many will not be willing to share their screen. So that is a sign of someone who might not be as truthful as what they need to be. Now, I think first and foremost, using both technology and human skill set to identify these gaps in the process. I think most recruiters are adept at being able to pick up red flags, and technology can do that. We can teach technology to identify the red flags, but if you rely solely on technology, you may open yourself up to some gaps that are constantly being challenged by these new tools that candidates have access to. But using a recruiter in concert with those tools will help you become more robust in the way that you fight candidate fraud. You mentioned, as we were preparing for this, doing more in-person interviews. I find that interesting. And I am seeing from our clients doing more in-person interviews than they have been over the past 4 or 5 years. So that's certainly one way to do that. I think, particularly if you're doing assessments or work exercises, requiring the person to do that on camera with a proctor or with somebody who's observing that activity can help you through that process as well. And there's a whole host of things that you can do, background and reference checks, reinforcing the robustness of your background checks, your reference checks. And we're even seeing candidates who are falsifying references. They give another person's name, another person's number, indicate that they worked at this company. Being judicious in every phase of the process. We are seeing more and more companies, Ben, who are drafting AI policies and what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and what are the checks and balances that they want to put in place throughout the process to make sure that they're identifying these candidate fraud activities.
So some good points there. ID checks, not just once, but throughout. Let's keep that one there. Sharing screens on assessments. I like that one. And yes, we talked about, I had a recent conversation with Ben Olson on the TA ops team at LinkedIn. We were doing a session together and he said, listen, we're going back. He said, I never thought we'd do this. We're back to doing in-person interviews as a way to screen for this and make sure we get the best out of people and we're figuring out who's above board. You mentioned background checks, having a policy around this. There's a organization I ran across recently. Their recruiting leader was in a session I was doing and she posted a comment and I have screenshot of that comment and saved it because it was so good. I'm waiting to post it on LinkedIn, but she said, one of the things that we have to do, we have to interact with customers and we have to do it often in person, but our interviewing process is mostly virtual. So to prevent people from using AI to do those things, to know how they're actually going to react to a customer, we're asking them, please don't use AI for this part of the process because we want to get your real take. And as a way to capture that, they actually sprinkle in some little Easter eggs in there, or whatever they call them. And so that when you respond back, what is it? They get spammers with a honeypot, right? They get spammers. They sprinkle in some things like, I'm an expert in Millennium Falcons or in crocheting, and they sprinkle those in. And if the people's responses come back with those things, they know that they're probably using AI to just generate an answer to that versus actually reading through and giving their real take on it. So they're looking for stuff like that. The other one I'll say is there are tools for deep fake videos where you can have a conversation. They're trained typically on like your shoulders and above. So one of the ways you can get those is, hey, turn your head to left or right or wave at me over here, virtual high five.
Exactly.
This leader was telling me recently, she was interviewing someone and like, hey, great answer, virtual high five. And the person just sits there on the camera like, hey, virtual high five. And can you put your hand up for me? And the person just hangs up.
And I think I have my real background on today. You have your real background on. A lot of times people will put the false backgrounds on that will potentially enable them to not be as truthful in terms of where they are, who they are, et cetera. Having a real environment on a background is a plus in that case. There are actually tools, technologies that are being developed to be able to address some of these issues. And there's a host of them out there. You can do the research. You can ask ChatGPT to come up with a list of these companies that are helping you identify candidate fraud. One of the things that is interesting to me, Ben, is the company's perception on what is cheating. In my conversations, some companies believe that if a candidate uses ChatGPT to enhance their resume, that's cheating. And most companies would say that many of the things that we've talked about, such as falsifying location, falsifying work eligibility, that's cheating. I do hope that as an industry, we get more defined in terms of what is cheating. Again, it's very hard for them to stand out, for being able to have a resume that kind of addresses the needs of an ATS, if you will, without changing kind of their profile or whatnot, I think is essential in today's world just because of the ease of applying. The example that I used of 100,000 inquiries or views, et cetera, it is very difficult to stand out, and candidates do need tools to help them to be able to do that. But we as an industry, we as companies need to come to some type of an agreement of what is cheating and what is not cheating. And I think a lot of the companies that are leading the way in terms of building these AI policies are actually doing that. This is encouraged, this is not, this is discouraged, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that I forgot to mention in terms of how you can spot these things is by checking a candidate's social media accounts compared to their resume. Now, some people are pretty elaborate. So when they falsify a resume, they're going to falsify their LinkedIn profile so that it matches their LinkedIn profile. But there are things you can do to be able to verify by looking at someone's online presence and being able to determine if that all lines up. And again, it causes red flags to come up. And most recruiters are trained in being able to spot these red flags.
I actually have an interview coming out about 2 weeks with Dr. Carrie Miller. She's an AI ethicist, and we talk about this because she's in the world of higher education. It's the same thing. She says, you're telling these students, these kids, they can't use AI for anything, but then you expect them to be able to use it once they're out of here and trying to go into the world of employment. And the same thing for employers. They're like, no, don't use it at all, but make sure when you get here, you can use it. And so it's a weird sort of dynamic. And I agree with you. Hey, this is okay. This is not. Let's make sure there's a clear line there, because otherwise you're going to.
To further that, Ben, telling candidates not to use AI, but using AI in your screening to me is a conflict, right? You're saying don't enhance, don't use AI, but we're going to use AI to screen you in or to screen you out. Again, I'll be very interested in what the ethicist has to say about that, but it's a very, very interesting topic.
You two would get along very well based on that comment you just made. Oh, we had a battle with my oldest daughters are starting to do essays and things for some of their higher level schoolwork. And they had one of them come back with, we did an AI score, so you got a 0 on this. And I went through and did 3 different AI detectors, and they were all different results. And I
Really?
went to the teacher and said, look, this is what this says. And when you look at the flags, she didn't even look at it because the flags are for all like the URLs and things, which are not AI generated.
Exactly.
It's a weird sort of thing. Okay, we're going to start doing this and taking screenshots of these things. We got to do our own checking because they're just handing it off. And the same thing is true of some employers. They just blindly let the tools do the work, and then they aren't using their brains to maybe figure out if there's a different answer or to look more deeply there.
Yeah, I have seen candidates who even go so far as to falsify like their GitHub profiles and work product, and all those tools are available to candidates to be able to use to kind of enhance their online presence, if you will, to
Yes.
verify or validate the things that they are falsifying.
Yes. You talked about the social media thing a minute ago when, not for every job, but if you're hiring for a job where someone's going to be probably more likely to be active on a network like LinkedIn, you can go and say, hey, look, this profile was set up a month ago.
Yep.
That's probably sketchy. Hey, this profile's 10 years old. They've got 300 connections. They're connected to people that do their same job. Okay. They're more likely to have some signals that indicate that they're real. But I don't put words in your mouth, but I don't think any one of these individual things is the answer. It's a combination of those things that work best for the jobs you're hiring for. Right. And just the culture, the way your interview flow works, all those sorts of things. Do you agree with that?
100%, Ben. And there are a ton of little things that you can do along the way, switching your interviewers so that you're not getting the exact same questions every single time. That can be documented and used against you, if you will. Looking at a LinkedIn profile, if someone has a lot of companies that can't be verified, if their dates are too perfect, those are all things that you can use to be able to verify, validate, to ensure. I think it does require just an additional level of judiciousness throughout the process from the company, particularly in today's world. And it's not going to get better. Like, I think in the short term, we're going to see more and more of this as tools are constantly being developed. I saw one tool that was an interview aid, and again, it was responding in real time to aid that candidate in responding to behavioral based questions based upon that candidate's background. So they are getting really good. And depending on the sophistication of the candidate, sometimes it's incredibly difficult to tell that.
I'm thinking if the people building these things would put this effort into doing something legitimate, that would be so great.
Yes.
Okay. If I was the black hat, the people who were like the hackers, the people doing the things that are a little bit sketchy, I heard about this major bank recently that uses an assessment as their primary hiring criteria. They don't use resumes, they use an assessment.
Oh, wow.
I was like, I would build an AI tool that took that assessment and figured out which ones got moved forward in the hiring process, remembers those answers, and then start selling at the people saying, hey, do you want the answers to this assessment that will get you in? Someone's probably doing that right now as I speak. But that's the thing that occurs to me is now that we have tools that are smart enough to look at the patterns in the data, that's all hiring really is, using patterns and trying to figure things out. And as you said, mixing it up with different interviewers, different questions, anything we can do to add some variety to that, the better. If we're using ChatGPT to generate all of our questions and the candidates are using it to provide all their answers, we're creating this vacuum where the humans not really speaking into that, and it's not being felt and heard and touched. And again, I don't want to belabor it, but that was a big part of what you talked about in our previous conversation about the human has to be part of this mechanical process, and no one benefits.
And I think the other thing that companies can do is to retrain your recruiters. So we just had an annual meeting, and one of the sessions, the concurrent sessions that we had, was on spotting fraud during the process for our recruiters. And we had a lot of the recruiters who were talking about their horror stories. So we'll keep adding to our library examples, things to watch for. But there are some good tools that are free that you can go out and get a nice PowerPoint to be able to train your recruiters. And it's pretty comprehensive. I would say that's the kind of the first line of defense for companies, is to have a robust training program in place so that your recruiters can spot these areas of fraud within the hiring process.
Yes, that's a big deal. Make sure they're ready for that. They need to understand that. And then as well, our hiring managers need to be made aware of these things, because when I was talking to this gentleman at the company I mentioned earlier, they were like, what do you mean? I said, this is a real thing. It's been around for a while. And that was just their first exposure to it. And so it was like this sudden dawned on them that now we've got to rethink everything about how we do this, because that could happen again. It's already happened once. Chances are it can happen again because they're a target as a big company.
Absolutely. And that's a really good point on hiring managers. Developing training for hiring managers to be able to spot fraud throughout the process is a really good point.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we talked through some of the things to capture there. I'll have to go back and tally those up as in the post production so I can get a full number, because I think that's a good call. I say, listen, there's 7, 8, 9 different ways for us to flag this, see these things with our human abilities. Plus, as you mentioned, there are tools being built to try to help with this, help us spot those things, checking IP addresses and other things like that to catch that. But fundamentally, let's go back to the basics here. Just like in cybersecurity, it's usually not a big hacker. It's a person that files into the person. Social engineering, helping our recruiters, helping our hiring managers, being trained there. Anything else that you'd add in, a tip or piece of advice, a practical suggestion for everybody that, again, now we scared them a little bit. We gave them some tools to work on it. Anything else you'd want to add and we haven't talked about yet?
I think, just to extenuate your point, I think being super diligent, because the tools that are available are so much more robust for candidates today. There is a fine line of being biased versus being super diligent. So you can't distrust everyone, but trust and verify, going back to the common sense. But I think an extra level of diligence throughout the process is required until this all shakes itself out. It will over the course of time as a kind of a natural curve. And we're still pretty early in that curve in terms of what's next. So just be super diligent.
I'm usually the optimistic one, and I hope you're correct. I hope you're right that it does shake itself out, because it feels like an arms race right now, where it's when we figure out one way to plug the gap, someone else figures out another way to hack that, or to a loophole or something. And so I hope that at some point it's a little more an even keel, because it feels like this.
Not to scare companies, but candidate tools are being developed faster than company tools.
Yep.
So to the arms race comment, there are more candidate tools than there are company tools at this moment.
All right. I think that's a terrifying note for us to wrap up on. In all seriousness, you all got some great tips and advice today from Terry on this. Go back to listen, this is ultimately fundamentally a human process. So think about all those human pieces that you know. If there was a silver medalist previously in your hiring process, if there's a referral that you're getting connected to, if there's an internal candidate, guess what? All three of those have more of a known quantity. They're probably real people. If we have those connections already, that's a great place to help filter to a faster and potentially better hire. But also some of the things that you shared today were really great and helpful at getting at, is this really a real person? Can they really do what they say they can? And are they going to fit what we're trying to hire for? And that's what we're trying to get to at the end of the day. So this has been tremendous. If someone wants to connect with you, wants to learn more about what you're doing, what's the best way for them to do that?
Just connect with me on LinkedIn or email, which is on my LinkedIn as well, but it's terry.terhark@nextthingrpo.com. Would love to engage on the topic. Ben, thank you so much for taking time on this. It is something that, again, needs to be screamed from the loudest voice possible. So appreciate you tackling the topic.
Yes, sir. Hey, thank you for being willing to say yes to this one, because I know it's a big one. It's a tough one to talk about, and there's so much. It's evolving every single day. But as anyone can hear out there in your voice and mine, this is something that we feel passionate about, because we're trying to just help people hire better, help them hire the right people, help them get those positions filled, and move on to the next one. So thank you again for joining me. Appreciate you. And to audience out there, thank you again for joining us today. We'll catch you again next time on We're Only Human.
Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I'm honored to have you as a listener. If you enjoyed this episode, please take 10 seconds to rate it at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, if you know a friend that could benefit from today's conversation, please pass it their way. After all, a rising tide lifts all ships. To see show notes, sponsor information, and our full show archives, visit onlyhumanshow.com.